Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode for you guys. So hopefully you enjoy. And today we're going to be discussing the state of the American right, because there's two big news events that happened last week that should illustrate that, both in the commentary level and in the congressional or political level. I mean, it's all politics, but the formal political element, you would say. And I think most of our audience wants to hear my thoughts on Candace Owens. I was getting a lot of comments on Twitter. We'll get to that second, because that's obviously the big news event, is Candace Owens getting fired from Daily Wire. And the first event that we're going to be discussing is what's going on in the House. In the House, House Speaker Mike Johnson passed a funding bill, a budget bill that irked a lot of Republicans. It didn't really solve the border issue. It kept funding all the problems around Biden. And a majority of Republicans voted against it. It still passed. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has now proposed a motion to vacate Johnson's seat. And all it would take is just a few people to knock him out of, or just a few, really just one Republican to knock him out of his speaker chair, because Republicans are now down to a 1-vote majority. I believe they started with like a 6-vote majority in early 2023, and now it has shrunk to just 1 vote because of a lot of retirements, early retirements, them kicking out George Santos, and then him getting replaced by a Democrat. And so the House looks to be in trouble. And so I want to illustrate this as what's going on with the Republican Party at that level, at the swamp level. And how do we react to this? Now, I was seeing a ton of people who are like, I feel betrayed by Johnson. And this is a terrible, how could he do this? It's like, how could he sell out on this? The thing that you have to realize is that Johnson is in a bit of an impossible situation. I don't want to defend Johnson because I wasn't enthusiastic about Johnson when he first elected. I'm not one of these idiots who are now all bitching about him and want him to be removed, who thought he was going to be the greatest House Speaker of all time. They're like, look, he trolls the left. Like, I remember Betty Johnson like, uh-oh, look at this. He's winking at the left and he's mocking their attempts to impeach Trump. And I was like, this guy is automatically going to suck. It's like, once he found out about the adopted black son, who then became a career criminal, and just the weird shit around him about how he checks his son's porn habits and stuff. And you're just like, I know this guy's going to suck. And even during, when the Black Lives Matter riots happened, he's like, oh, my black son has really educated me about the systemic racism in America. And it's like, well, it's probably because your adopted son is a career criminal, who I think is, he's been in and out of jail. I don't think he's in jail right now, but he has a long rap sheet. And you're like, well, maybe there's a reason for this, that he has this long interactions with the police. I was like, this guy's going to suck. And people were just automatically like, anyone not McCarthy, it's just going to be so much better. And I think I said this at the time, or I was saying this when McCarthy was removed, is that any Republican they're going to get is probably going to be the same as McCarthy. The only difference is that person's going to raise a lot less money than McCarthy. And that's not so much of a defense of McCarthy. That's just illustrating where Republicans are right now. They have a divided House caucus. They don't have any leadership. They have nothing to unite them. And the moderates, they suck, but they have no incentives to go along with a conservative agenda. And so it was the same with the budget bill. The time that Republicans had to make a stand on this was with the Senate. And this was a fault of the moderates, in that the moderates negotiated this horrible immigration bill, this immigration deal that didn't solve the problem at all, and actually gave Biden the power to permanently legalize a lot of these illegal aliens by hiring all these asylum officers who would then take these cases and obviously approve them because they're all liberals that they're going to hire. There's also several other bad things with it. But that's, listen to the old podcast I did about that. But, so that was terrible. And that was the fault of the moderates, and the conservatives were right to shut it down. But once you shut down that bill, it should have been clear to Republicans they're not going to get any immigration thing done. And you just have to wait till Trump wins in November. And it looks like Trump's going to win in November. And I think Mike Johnson, he had said in private conversations with lawmakers, he's saying, we are not going to solve anything on this up until Trump becomes into the office. And our main goal is to ensure that we're not doing anything to hurt ourselves in the election for November. That's a smart strategy. Now, a lot of these Republicans want to have a government shutdown to send a message. The thing is, there is not a there's not a clear path to victory for that. And in any way, case, Republicans would be blamed for it, and it would potentially hurt Republicans down the line to have this as that they're just like shutting down the government. They don't. There's no possibility. The Republicans now have a 1-vote majority. They had before this happened, they had a 3-vote majority because Ken Buck and Mike Gallagher, I want to say, I don't think his first name's Gallagher, Representative Gallagher, who both resigned and abruptly resigned and said they're just quitting. They're not coming back in April. They were, you have a 3-vote majority, and you can't even get that majority together on anything. They have no trump card. They have no leverage over the Senate, and they have no leverage over Democrats to get this. They certainly have no leverage over Biden. So whatever they would demand, Democrats would just keep their foot down and say, no, we're not doing this. And now with a 1-vote majority, they literally have zero leverage. Because it looks like if Marjorie Taylor Greene actually follows through with her motion to vacate, I don't know if she will. But she didn't put it to a vote when she, there was measures that she could have put it to immediate vote, but when she announced it on Friday, but she didn't. So it could be just a PR move that she just doesn't follow through on. But we'll see when they come back in April. And if she actually goes through with the motion to vacate, he will absolutely, I guarantee you, he will not be Speaker of the House. And it won't be a Republican who will be the Speaker of the House. It'll be Hakeem Jeffries. Hakeem Jeffries, because moderates are so sick of House Freedom Caucus and these types, for a lot of stupid reasons, for a lot of cringe reasons, I'm not wanting to defend them, I'm just explaining them, they will vote for Hakeem Jeffries. And Hakeem Jeffries, all he has to do is promise a nonpartisan House speakership, that he would allow a lot of Republicans to keep their committee chairs. That's all he would have to do, and he would become House Speaker. He would not insist on Democrats having all the committee chairs, is that he would do half and half. If he offered half the committee chairs to Republicans, but removed the people I didn't really like Jim Jordan at Judiciary and Comer at Oversight, whom the moderates don't really like anyway, they would be totally fine with that. Hakeem Jeffries could get at least one Republican to vote for him. And that's all he needs, is just one Republican to vote for him, and he'd be House Speaker. And that would be such an embarrassment for House Republicans. I don't think this would affect the election that much, but it would just be very, very embarrassing. A shutdown could potentially impact the election, but Democrats having the House majority, it just shows just how ridiculous the House caucus is. And so they're just not guided to do anything. And so when you see this stuff, when I saw all these conservatives complaining about Johnson, it's like, look, you guys voted for this. You guys wanted this. You guys wanted a weak House leader who could not get people in line, who could not, who's not very good at raising money, who's not a strong leader, who is very weak, both in he's worried about what the moderates think, he's worried about what the conservatives think, and he's just pushed aside, and he's also worried about what may happen if he takes risky positions. They were bound to have this type of thing happen. And now when, what they expected happens, because Jim Jordan would do the exact same thing, who was what they wanted, and Johnson was who all these conservatives wanted too. Jordan would be doing the same thing as Johnson. Now they're just like, oh, this is ridiculous. We need to, we have the will of the people. No, you have a one vote majority. That's not the will of the people. And even in that one vote majority, it's strongly divided. You don't even have every single member in that one vote majority on your side. So you have to deal with these things. And a lot of the House Republicans seem to be eager to make Republicans want to lose House conservatives. I mean, the Republican Study Committee, Republicans have been trying to say, no, we're not going to ban IVF. We're not going to ban IVF. And the Republican Study Committee endorsed legislation or principles that would essentially ban IVF. And it's like Republican Study Committee is the largest faction within the House caucus. It's generally pretty conservative. And, after Republicans make all these things, they, pass language that would end IVF as we know it. And it's like, you guys have to realize, like, it's an election year. This is not all about winning Twitter engagement and getting, praised by Steve Bannon on War Room. You've got to think about getting Trump in the White House. That needs to be the number one concern, not looking like a hero on talk radio or whatever. And this is what these guys want to do, is that they don't have a desire to help their team win. They just have a desire to look like they're a rebel and doing something great. And, they get they get high Twitter engagements for promising unrealistic expectations to their followers. And then they, make the whole party look stupid. So a lot of the audience isn't going to like this talk that I gave, because they're like, oh, the House GOP caucus can impeach and arrest Biden with just a one vote majority. And they can. They'll just use force and power to force the moderates. And if the moderates don't vote for it, they can order their arrest. I mean, what I've seen the House majority of people have talked about what the House majority could do since they came to power has been ridiculous. They've always been like, why isn't the House GOP arresting like Mayorkas? Why isn't the House GOP? I mean, they did impeach him. It was very surprising that they did. I was surprised that they were able to manage to do that. That's pretty much they're going to manage to do that we like up until November. But people are always like, oh, why aren't they arresting, Jack Smith, or why aren't they arresting these people? It's like, the House GOP caucus does not have the power to arrest people, okay? But they have promised these unrealistic expectations by a lot of these conservative lawmakers who just want to get higher Twitter engagement and get this stuff done. And most of what their principles are about is not stuff that we care about, like about ending restricting immigration or, affirmative action or anything of that sort. It's just simply like, oh, the GOP is betraying us because they're not lowering taxes. They're not lowering the debt. It's like, we don't give a shit about that stuff. And that's what a lot of these fights have been over. So now recently it's been more over immigration. But with this thing with the immigration bill, the alternative to this bill is the Senate immigration deal, which is worse than just a straight budget bill. You just have to take the straight budget bill, and a shutdown would impact Republicans more and would possibly negatively impact Trump's chances of winning in November. Which Trump, as I said, the most important thing for Republicans is to get Trump elected, because then they can solve a lot of problems that they can't do anything about right now, especially on immigration. And anything that possibly hinders it or hurts his chances should not be pursued. So them, saying, oh, we're pro IVF, and then issuing principles and endorsing bills that would end IVF is stupid, because that hurts Trump's chances in November. Having a government shutdown, which they're not going to convince, which they would have to cave in to Democrats anyway on, because Democrats have no desire to capitulate on anything. Because if they did have a government shutdown, Democrats are like, oh, well, how about the Senate immigration deal? And that's worse than just a straight budget bill. So they have to realize where they are. They have this one vote majority. And I think in April, it may just become Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker of the House, which I may argue it could be better for Republicans because I don't think right at this point Republicans haven't done anything positive with their House majority. It won't be good because their committee, it will end the investigation if they, it will end the investigations into Biden. I don't know how much you could say that's impacting the election. It could, some of the stuff's coming out. It definitely doesn't help Biden, but you just have to deal with this situation. And I think for a lot of people, everyone always wants to get riled up and worked up and feel like the party's betraying us. And it's like, look, the Republicans made these decisions last year with how they were going to govern and how they're going to run a House. And it's been a clown show ever since they took over the House. And really, the only way to solve this is just to have Trump in the White House again, and things will be much better. And so everything we should focus on is just achieving that goal, and just understanding the House and Congress are just not going to do shit until Trump is back in the White House. So that's my opinion on that. And now the one thing to lead into Candace Owens is that while everyone's arguing over how Republicans should be hardcore and more representative of their base and stuff, the funny thing about Republicans, especially compared with the online sphere, is how militantly pro-Israel it is. All these Republicans, with the exception of Thomas Massie and to a lesser extent Rand Paul, are 100% fervently behind Israel and would give Israel an unlimited amount of money. And that would come to a surprise to you if you're seeing the type of battles we are witnessing on the online sphere, on the commentary sphere, with Candace Owens getting fired from Daily Wire. Now, this happened Friday or Thursday, happened last week. And the one thing is, I'm surprised at how long she lasted at Daily Wire when she began talking about this stuff, especially after October 7th on Israel and Jews in general, with her statements. And I wasn't even aware of like how hardcore she had gotten on this, but she had one segment. I don't know when this happened, but I was just reading reports about this where she talked about how Hollywood is controlled by a Jewish lobby and they're engaged in a lot of criminal activity. And I was like, that's a little bit more than what I thought, that she was just criticizing Israel. So she's been going off on a lot of this stuff, and it's very typical Candace, because Candace, some people say like, oh, she should have stayed in boundaries and say that. But the thing about Candace is she always just goes beyond the boundaries. And a lot of times this is a good thing because, what really made me like Candace was in 2020 when everyone was getting on their knees to worship George Floyd, like at the height of everyone crying over George Floyd, she delivered a truth bomb about Floyd and how he was a drug user and a criminal. And that clip went viral on Facebook. And thanks to that, her, clip on Floyd, that gave a lot of boomers on Facebook alternative information or true information on a story that the media was trying to psyop them into, supporting a radical racial revolution, which unfortunately most of the country did. But she was at the start of that counter movement against, lionizing Floyd and turning him into a saint. And that was a risky move because most of the conservatives were all crying over Floyd at that time. And there was even one black conservative who I think wrote this article in the fall last year attacking Candace Owens. And one of the reasons that she attacked Candace Owens was for being mean to George Floyd. And it was an article that all these DeSantoids were sharing from, I think it was from Red State or Town Hall or one of these places. And it was from like 2020. Is like, she's a fake black conservative. And it was because she was attacking George Floyd and attacking Black Lives Matter. And I think none of these people bothered to read into the middle of the piece. So these people were upset. But people have been getting upset at Candace for a while. She has been going off the Daily Wire party line for a while. Because in 2023, all of Daily Wire was anti-Trump, pro-DeSantis. Candace was anti-DeSantis, pro-Trump, which is very different from the other hosts. And a lot of the other hosts attacked her and a lot of people are going to try to forget this stuff, but being pro-Trump in the first half of 2023 was not the popular position in conservatism. The popular position was to pretend that DeSantis was going to win the primary easily, and you were going to be purged if you thought otherwise. And all these DeSantoids were trying to attack her for even claiming this stuff. Of course, like in 2016 with Never Trumpers, who were all like threatening Trump supporters within conservative media, saying they're going to purge them, they were completely wrong. But of course, they've not suffered any consequences or learned anything. Conservatism, it is better to be wrong in the right circumstances, or what conservative movement wants to believe, rather than to be right when conservatism wants you to be wrong. It's all about wish casting and thinking that what you want is just going to become reality. It's definitely with DeSantis. It was definitely the case in 2016 with the Republican primary. All these idiots were like, Trump will never win a primary. He won the primary. And then, and by primary, I meant like a single state. And then these guys turn into Trump cheerleaders. And a lot of the smarter DeSantoids are doing that as well. But it's all about, all conservative political analysis is completely idiotic and wrong, usually. It's just wish casting and telling the audience what they want to hear. But it's better for you to lie to your audience than to be honest to your audience when your audience doesn't want to hear the truth. And that was the case with DeSantoids. But, so she had already made herself a controversial figure with just that line. But obviously when it came to October 7th, and her greater criticism of Israel, her criticizing the Jewish lobby and others, criticizing a lot of neocons and Jewish conservatives, and she even was starting to attack Ben Shapiro. She did a whole interview with Tucker, which I always say was like an alt-right podcast from 2016, what they were talking about. And I thought, this is like, okay, I think Daily Wire is going to fire her, but they kept her on. And I don't know why. I've heard, the truth of what happened. I heard that maybe this is when the contract was ending and they just decided not to renew it, which maybe for Daily Wire, that's why they didn't fire her. They're like, look, her contract ends in a few months. We'll just let her be Candace for then, and then we'll get rid of her. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. I don't have an inside scoop on this. Clearly the primary basis for her getting pushed out is her criticism of Israel and the accusation of anti-Semitism. The ADL just put out an article attacking her as an anti-Semite and being supported by Fuentes and other people. So this is clearly, this has been building up. There's, Rabbi Shmuley Botique, who's really lost his mind. He's, I don't know what's going on with that guy. He's lost his mind solely because of Candace Owens, and he's been posting some extremely absurd stuff on Twitter in response to Candace. But you had figures like him, demanding she get fired. You had a lot of Zionist conservatives demanding she get fired. And, there's stuff that was building up. Maybe, it wasn't contract renewal, but they had decided that they had enough. The one thing that could have been the final straw, I think that, as I want to make this clear, the primary basis for her getting fired was the criticism of Israel, going off on the party line that Daily Wire wants to have on Israel and definitely Jews and other matters. That's why she got fired. But I think the final straw in saying that, like, okay, we're ending this now, is her Macron theory, where she's saying that Macron's wife is actually a man, and that became international news. Macron actually even responded to it, and she staked her professional reputation on it. And I don't think Mrs. Macron is a man. I think it's clear she's a woman. There's not very good evidence for that. And I think a lot of conservative media is like, I don't think Daily Wire wanted to really defend that. But I think they already wanted to get rid of her. I think if she had not had the Israel criticism and this was it, they would have obviously not fired her. But then they just decided, okay, we're not going to wait around any longer. We're pushing her out. A lot of the Daily Wire co-hosts, or not co-hosts, but other hosts, went a little crazy on this. Andrew Klavan had some ridiculous rant all about Candace. Everyone is aware of him saying Christ is King is satanic, which That's a little strange for a Christian, for a professed Christian to say, but it's also what got less attention is him saying that the only reason, or strongly implying the only reason that European civilization was good was because Jews were there, and due to the Holocaust, Europe is no longer great because of that. And it's like I think that mistakes history. It's like Europe had two devastating wars that destroyed the continent. And then, that built itself up economically and it, was able to recover a little bit, but it didn't recover its greatness and power from that because it became, during the Cold War, it was under the heel of either America or Soviet Union. It had passed from being great powers. Europe was no longer a great power after these two devastating wars that killed millions of people and, destroyed much of the infrastructure and other things of Europe. I don't think it was the secret Jewish element of this. I think it was just the war in general that just killed all these Europeans and wrecked the continent. You can't have two devastating wars within 30 years that kill millions and millions of people and then expect to still be the same afterwards. And then you witness the rise of two powers that have connection to Europe, but were seen that extra European. I would see, you would argue that Soviet Union is something a little bit outside of Europe. Russia itself is part of Europe, but it's a complicated relationship. And America also has a relationship to Europe. We're descended from Europe, but we're also separate from Europe as well. And then both America and Soviet Union came to dominate the continent. And then after the Cold War, it was just America. Europe gave up its great power great power status in the process. So I don't know. That's a bizarre argument, but they're all doing this stuff because of Candace. And it's just triggering. A lot of these people have lost their minds from October 7th on. I mean, just look at Rabbi Shmuley and his latest, and all of his just his weird shit he's doing and all that. And there's many others who are just like frothing at the mouth, who are just like this. And it's something that's going on with Israel's war, is that Israel's war is a lot of these guys are having to defend things that are, a number of these neoconservatives who are, and Jewish conservatives who will try to be moderate, and they'll cry a river of tears over some illegal migrant who came to the border and, maybe they had a ripped shirt or something, and they'll just like, oh, this is terrible. Oh, how could Trump do this? And I remember at the time, all these people were screaming and hysteric over Trump for, family separation and this shit. Now these same people will see like an Israeli drone like blow up some teenager, and they'll be like, you're an anti-Semite for thinking that this is wrong. This is absolutely a terrorist. And then it's like, we have killed no civilians in Gaza. They've all been terrorists. And it's like, I don't think that's the case, because like Israel is right now just ethnically cleansing Gaza. And they're getting away with it too, because of, I think that Israel realizes is this their last window of opportunity to do what they want in Gaza, because of rising international criticism of it. They can see the writing on the wall with America, with the younger generation not being pro-Israel, and they realize that they may not have another 10 or 20 years to try to do this, and the last window of opportunity to do this is now. And they're going about and doing it. And so all these neocons and others who, be sad at George Floyd and illegal migrants and all this stuff, and then they see outright war crimes and they'll just like totally defend it, and then they'll get pissed off and like, oh, we need community notes here. This is not a war crime. This is perfectly legitimate active behavior. And so that's a funny thing that they're doing with. But they're no longer being able to police conservative commentary about this matter. As in the online sphere or the general sphere, or I need to take a step back to define what I think about conservative, or how you see conservative media. There's two sections of it. One is the traditional conservative media of print media, Fox News, talk radio. Primarily an older audience, 100% pro-Israel. There is no criticism of Israel in there. And that's what most of the base gets their information from, the traditional sources. Then there's the online sphere, which is the podcast, the streams, Twitter, X, and that sphere. And that's primarily a much younger audience. And that is having a strong division between pro and anti-Israel. And you're seeing a lot of figures who would have never said anything about Israel, never said anything critical about Israel, who are criticizing Israel. Tucker's always been actually critical of Israel, but now he's being able to be more open about it since he's no longer with Fox. Charlie Kirk, obviously. Candace, Lauren Chen, even Matt Walsh, at Daily Wire was critical of Israel. The difference between Candace Owens and Walsh is that, Walsh wasn't talking about the Jewish lobby within Hollywood. Steven Crowder is also making these points. So you're seeing a lot of these people. And a lot of these people were also figures that the alt-right, the old alt-right or dissident right back in the 2017, 2018 would have hated or mocked. Steven Crowder at that time was like Ben Garrison. And if for the old heads who are listening, Ben Garrison, way back in like 2015, 2014, a bunch of like 4chaners and others, he was just a libertarian comic, and they edited his comics to be like neo-Nazi and stuff. And it was very funny stuff that they were doing. And Ben Garrison got very pissed off about this. But then he became a Trump supporter, and then all the edited comics became his real comics. So that was one funny thing. They tried to do this with Crowder. They did these edits of him being like, skinheaded stuff and having like rune tattoos and other things. And they did this because they thought that Crowder was a cuck, and that's why it was humorous. But now Crowder has been one of the more forthright proponents of stuff that you would have only associated with the dissident right a few years ago. Now he's into this stuff. Candace Owens herself is that. And she was originally a liberal who had been some involved in some doxing. I forget the whole story, but she was not like based. And then she emerged in 2017 as just another black 2017, 2018 as just another black conservative, and dissident right really didn't like this, and she said a lot of cringe things. And then later on, she became way more based and way more one of the better, if not the best, conservative commentator popularizing dissident right views. And Matt Walsh is another example. I think Matt Walsh, the difference between him and like Crowder and Owens is that he always makes sure he stays within the fence of acceptable discourse. He pushes at the fence, but once he realizes like the limits, he's like, okay, I'm not going to go there. Or he makes concessions that ensures he stays within the plantation, such as he's always been very anti-Trump. That, makes him seen as a controllable, or he's one of the crew. They don't have to worry about him going off the reservation. And so he's always stayed within the lines. I think it's still good what he, talks about anti-white racism and spreads some other ideas. But at the end of the day, you have to have suspicion of him because he always stays within the fence. Crowder and Owens, Lauren Chen, a few others, they go outside the fence. They go beyond the fence. And that's why they are attacked much more. And they're at greater risk of getting purged from the movement. American conservatism. And so that's what happened with Candace, is that Candace, when she got, others were making criticism of Israel. Even Charlie Kirk goes beyond the fence, but I think Charlie Kirk, one of the great things about Charlie Kirk is that I think everyone kind of understands that it's not intentional. He just kind of, he's just he's very earnest and genuine about his like getting red pilled. And he's taking many red pills at one point. So when he just says something, that is totally beyond the fence, that people are just like, what? And I think there's an awareness that maybe he doesn't fully understand where the fence is. Owens knows where the fence is. She goes beyond it anyway. Kirk isn't aware there's a fence in the first place and just like says what he feels at the moment. And sometimes it's definitely not something conservative media wants to say, but he's just too powerful to get rid of. I mean, he controls TPUSA. So he's able to say that. And it's the same with Tucker. Tucker absolutely knows where the fence is and goes beyond it. So this development is definitely having an impact on younger conservatives. And there has been a few polls showing that younger conservatives, when it comes to Israel, have a much more skeptical attitude towards our greatest ally, as boomers see it. But the one thing you have to keep in mind is that it is reaching young conservatives, but they are still a small segment of the base. They are not the majority of the base. And with the majority of the base, a lot of this stuff is not getting to them. By polling, they think that like Israel's doing a great job with the war. The boomers are all like totally 100% thinking Netanyahu's awesome. And that's because they're listening to the traditional conservative media sphere, which is 100% pro-Israel. And so you could argue that they're not going to be the future of it, but they're very much the present. And that's why this anti-Israel sentiment is not reflected by any Republican politician besides Thomas Massie. And Massie may be losing his seat. Not just because of Israel, but in large part because of his opposition towards Trump. I think opposition towards Trump, to give a bit of a white pill, it's more because of his opposition towards Trump, which he should have been smart enough not to go full in on DeSantis and attack Trump. I mean, I do like his foreign policy views and other things, but he was an idiot for doing that. And DeSantis, of course, isn't really helping him out. So he may lose his primary. And if he goes, then you really just have Rand Paul. And Rand Paul is not as vocal about this issue as Massie is. And so you would basically have no Republicans who are willing to criticize Israel. And that is a reflection of the traditional base that they have. Now, that's not a reflection of the younger crowd and maybe what the future is, but that's a reflection of the present. The broader changes are happening on the left with Democrats, where their entire under 40 base is anti-Israel. Maybe not the entirety, but the vast majority of it. And really, even much of their base, if they're not anti-Israel, they just don't give a shit about it. It's really just Jewish donors and some of the old elderly within the Democrats who even care about this issue. And they're seeing a lot of their constituency come out against Israel. A lot of the black church leaders are coming out in favor of Palestine, demanding a ceasefire and criticizing Biden. You see the Muslims obviously condemning this stuff. A lot of their younger staffers are sending all these messages out. And, staffers may not have that much influence, especially compared to donors, but these are the people they depend on to do activism and do all their work. And none of them are fans of Israel. And so you are seeing some evidence of that. The funny thing is about when it comes to institutional power versus people power when it comes to Israel, is that the institutions of Democrats, due to donors and establishment politicians, they are coming down hard on the really anti-Israel politicians like Jamal Bowman and Rashida Tlaib and really Bowman, especially because Bowman may lose his seat in large part because of his stance on Israel. And they have been kneecapping a lot of these primary challengers who are running on being critical of Israel as well. But the party leadership itself is trying to accommodate that feeling of that growing animosity towards Israel and growing support for Palestinians. Even Chuck Schumer is demanding the Netanyahu government change. That would have never happened 10 years ago. Even Biden's making criticism of Israel that the Democrats would have never done 10 years ago. And that is a reflection of it. But they're wanting to go at a very moderate pace, and the establishment is doing an effective job so far, but they know that this can't last forever, especially with their constituency they have. But compared with Republicans, this is a major issue with the Democrats. It's reflected in the primaries. It's reflected in their internal battles. It is probably the number one dividing line within the Democrats and left now. Within Republicans, it's not a dividing line at all among Republicans. It's a dividing line among the online conservative media sphere, which is still important. That's not to say that it's not important. And it definitely impacts what younger conservatives, I would say definitely the under 30 crowd, you would even say under 40 crowd, how they view the world and how they view their policies in politics. But it's not impacting the vast majority of the base, which is over 40. But that could change. As I said, this could all change, and some of this stuff is leaking out. And a lot of stuff from the online sphere does leak out to the base, the mainstream base. stuff like Great Replacement, immigration, and all these things and even animosity towards or the truth about George Floyd, that has reached the base. But some stuff isn't reaching the base, like MLK criticism isn't reaching the base yet. And I want to say yet. It could, but it hasn't reached them. And the anti-Israel stuff hasn't reached the base yet. This stuff is definitely reaching younger segment of the base, but you have to remember that that's not a majority of the base. It's a segment of the base, maybe a quarter at most. So I'm going to conclude this section with a Conley question from K-Max. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Conley option at Highly Respected Substack. That's at highly-respected.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ Summits while you're there. This is from K-Max. And K-Max asks, with Candace Owens firing, is it clear the Israel issue is the more of the breaking point than any other in Con Inc.? Candace could have advocated less immigration, opposed anti-white discrimination, even say we need to eliminate critical race theory and DEI. And pretty much most conservatives say that stuff without issue. This issue got her fired, though, true. And in your view, is it just impossible to take an America First perspective of we cannot give Israel 100% unconditional support? Think even how Ron Paul did it by saying we need to cut foreign aid spending to all nations, not just Israel. Still in right-wing circles, this is not allowed. It's not impossible. I think it is. It is definitely the breaking issue with Conservative Inc. is that if Candace Owens simply just stuck to that stuff and maybe even just said the mild criticism that Matt Walsh was saying of Israel, like, well, we should spend more on home rather than on foreign missions or on foreign aid. She would have kept her job at Daily Wire. But she, that's not Candace's style. Candace breaks through the fence. And I think that's why a lot of people like her. So she definitely went full in on this issue, and as she wanted to do. But that's what's the cutoff is, like, there are limits on what you can say about Israel. And I think a lot of commentators are testing limits and pushing the limits. There is a more acceptable Overton window on it. And even with Candace Owens, she's still going to retain a lot of her audience no matter what happens. Like, this isn't as bad for her as Tucker's firing from Fox is, because Tucker was a part of the traditional media sphere. And when you have the 8 p.m. slot at Fox, you have a captive audience. That audience will turn in no matter what's on Fox at 8 p.m. And that's seen by Fox's ratings return largely to what they were when Tucker was on air, because they have a captive audience that will just watch whatever's on Fox. With Candace, people are tuning in because it's Candace. And it's, they have to make an additional effort to watch what's online. And a lot of that audience that she's built up with Daily Wire will go along with her. Now, there are perks that she loses by losing Daily Wire. They have that big, giant subscription base. They have a lot of the infrastructure to promote her material. They're huge on Facebook. So she will have some limits, but she can make up for it and get to roughly that same level, probably within a few months or a year of what she was at Daily Wire. With Tucker, it's impossible for him to reach his level of influence he had at Fox at the 8 p.m. slot. So Candace will still matter within conservatism, and this shows a difference that's happening in conservatism, is that these institutions are no longer as powerful as they once were, even 5 years ago. Like, compare it with my docs, like, getting purged from Conservative Inc. in 2018 was a major blow. It's like, you're not going to get published anywhere. Substack wasn't really around, and everyone knows who's within that sphere knows that they can't have any association with you, etc. Now these institutions don't wield as much power as they once had. And with Candace getting purged from Daily Wire is that other people will want to interview her. And she could find her own audience on her own. And not even find her own audience, but keep her audience and maintain it and even grow it on her own. And so it's no longer that as big of a deal from Daily Wire. She's also going to lose a lot of money, I imagine. Knowing what Crowder's contract was, where he was set to earn like $15 million a year, I imagine Candace earns around that, probably even more. So that's a heavy blow to her. But she can once again build up something on her own to equal what she had at Daily Wire. And so they no longer have the ability to restrict discourse in the way that they once did. So that's what's happening with that. And now with the future, with saying the Israel thing, yeah, that is the one limit when it comes to these institutions. But you could go beyond the institutions to say what you want to say. And there's a greater tolerance for Israel criticism or even talking about Jews and other matters when it comes from a non-white person. Because the people who are most pushing for this in the mainstream are black conservatives. That's the funny thing, because it's like Candace, you got Jason Whitlock at The Blaze, who had E. Michael Jones on, which was a wild event. That's a crossover I would have never imagined to happen. Jason, for those who don't know, Jason Whitlock was a huge sports commentator, just even a few years ago. He's a very mainstream figure. Now he's at The Blaze interviewing E. Michael Jones about how Jews ruined or control the black community or something. I forget the discussion has it. You've got the Hodge twins. You got Dom Luker on Twitter, who's just a Twitter guy, but he was delivering total boomer bait before, and now he's just like talking about how Israel killed Michael Jackson and stuff. You've got him, Bryson Gray, John Miller. You got there's probably some other people I'm forgetting. And so it's generally coming from them. And I think it's more that conservatives, they're so enthralled to the idea of black conservatives that when they go off the plantation, they don't know what to do. They're like, well, that's an interesting point of view. And it's more likely, they're less likely to come down hard on that opinion when it's coming from a black conservative or any non-white conservative. I think this was even the case with... and it's just non-whites in general, because, Pedro Gonzalez, I don't think our audience likes Pedro, rightfully so, but he was able to take, dissident right talking points and deliver it on Fox or at a semi-mainstream level because he was brown. If a white guy was saying this stuff, they wouldn't allow him to say this, because he was essentially taking what I was saying and others were saying and then being told, well, you can't say that within conservatism. And then he was able to say the exact same stuff. And then like, oh, brilliant point. They're all saying this because he's brown. And so when you have a non-white voice say this stuff, they're more likely to tolerate it. I don't know if I agree with it, because there's been a lot of people crying foul over this stuff, but they're more, it's much more awkward for them to react to it when it's coming from a black conservative. And the fact that Dom Luker is involved in this shows that they know there's an audience out there on the online sphere. As I don't know how genuine Luker is about this stuff, because it's like he's just all Twitter rage bait that he's mainly done, and it's like whatever can get the highest engagement. And they do realize this stuff gets high engagement, and so they do realize there's an audience out there. And so a lot of the online commentary is going to go more in or reflect more of this direction. I don't think you're going to see this so much in how conservative media is developing, because right now conservative media, or the online sphere, different from the traditional media sphere, is dominated by three things. It's Daily Wire, which is obviously very pro-Israel. Teep USA, which is very pro-Israel, but Charlie Kirk wanders off outside the plantation and says things he's not supposed to say, but he can get away with it. And then The Blaze, which is more of its hosts are more willing to criticize Israel, and it's more tolerated at The Blaze than it is at Daily Wire. And those are like now the three core institutions of saying what conservatives under 40 are listening to and engage with. Now, there's obviously a lot of other things, but those are the biggest. And stuff like, what was big online conservative media a few years ago, like Breitbart and Daily Caller, are not as relevant anymore, or even in some cases irrelevant. But that's what the three big things are. And they're the ones that are pushing the envelope, even with Daily Wire, even though they're very cringe in a lot of their hosts. But Michael Knowles, previously Candace Owens, and Matt Walsh do push the envelope on what's acceptable discourse, and they are taking a lot of dissident right viewpoints. And even Ben Shapiro sometimes does this when he had a whole monologue in defense of human biodiversity, which is, once again, I don't want to say this is a good thing about Ben Shapiro, but it does reflect something that he's saying it. And then obviously the Blaze is interacting with this stuff. And so when that is defining the online sphere, that's showing that there's a greater openness and tolerance for having this type of discourse and engaging with controversial subjects that wouldn't have been allowed. And that's a positive development. Now, what are they going to be allowed to... How far they can take this is being shown by Candace Owens. Now, if Candace Owens still maintains her same level of influence and popularity, then this stuff will have wider acceptance within conservatism. The thing that you always have to remember is that it's not exactly translating into Republican politics, because this is not found there. You're not seeing any Republicans debate this within primaries outside of Thomas Massey's primary, and I think Massey doesn't really want it to become a primary issue because he knows that it would probably hurt him in that regard, and it's not happening within the traditional conservative media field. I think in conclusion, it would be better for Candace to go on her own, because at the end of the day, Daily Wire has like a party line that they want to impose. They have an editorial line, just like any publication. And their party line is that we want to be emphatically pro-Israel. And it's better for someone who wants to, speak their truth and speak their mind, to go somewhere else and to move on from that, rather than, have this awkward arrangement where they're with the Daily Wire. And I think that's one thing that Daily Wire wants to. Daily Wire really wants to police conservatism and make itself the centerpiece of this new online sphere. And even Daily Wire is, unlike a lot of the other elements of the online sphere, does have the capacity to influence a little bit of the general conservative base. And Shapiro and crew want to jealously guard that and what information they're receiving. And it is good for them to lose a lot of their popular influencers so they do not have this preeminent position within the online media sphere of what's acceptable and what's tolerated and what can be said. Is that you want them dethroned from that position. And hopefully Candace Owens accelerates that. We'll have to see what happens in that regard. But it'll be, a way to see. It'll be interesting to see what she does next. I don't think that this is going to be a tremendous blow for her. I mean, financially, obviously, but I think she's still going to retain much of her influence and popularity. And unlike in 2018, where she had to worry about getting banned from Twitter or those things, she does have to worry about getting banned from YouTube. I do have to say that. She's still going to be able to make the impact that she was making while at Daily Wire. So we're already well over 50 minutes in this podcast, and I still haven't gotten to the many God Vliet questions. We have one more brief topic I want to talk about that's in the news before we go. It's the Moscow terror attack that's allegedly claimed by ISIS. Some people were wondering what my thoughts are on this. I don't think I got a question on this. I was looking for it. I didn't really see it. But just to give brief thoughts, I'm not really... I don't have an inside scoop onto this. ISIS is responsible. I mean, they did broadcast these videos that were shown by these guys shooting up the place. If it's certainly not a Moscow false flag, because if it's a Moscow, because that's always media is like, oh, Russian, definitely a Russian false flag. I mean, the Oval Office, which is the deranged account that always acts like the animals at the White House are tweeting, said this might be a Russian false flag. If it was a Russian false flag, they would have found white neo-Nazis to do this and to say that they were been shouting Slava Ukraini in the theater. And instead they got Muslims. So I don't think it was that. There is a chance that Ukrainian intelligence may have been involved in this and helping these guys out. But ISIS was involved. Does that totally rule out that maybe Ukrainian elements within Ukraine helped them out? No, it doesn't rule that out. But we don't know. It's too early to say. It's a weird story. We'll keep following it, but I don't really have an inside scoop into this. I don't have a really strong opinion yet developed on this. And they have had a lot of Islamic terrorism before. They do, mainly from Chechens and from other groups. ISIS does hate Russia. I mean, Russia was bombing the shit out of them in Syria. So there is a reason for them to attack. So we'll have to see. More details will come out in the future. I don't know if Ukraine would... one thing about Ukraine I will say for final thought. I don't know if Ukraine would want to go along with this. First off, America would not approve this. America is okay with them doing assassinations and other things. I mean, America didn't give a shit that they tried to kill Dugin, and they ended up killing Dugin's daughter. I haven't cared about a lot of other things that Ukrainian intelligence have tried to do, and they are wanting to do terrorism within Russia. But like shooting up a theater and like blowing it up, that is... America is not going to sign off on that. I mean, because they're going to understand that this has no purpose other than to really piss off the Russians. So there's limits to what they accept. But maybe Ukraine would have just done it anyway without American approval. And if it came out that Ukraine did this, this would absolutely hurt Ukraine's chances of getting more funding from America. Because it's like we've been at war with this stuff for years, this type of terrorism. So they're definitely not going to approve of that. But I could see Ukrainians just like, oh, this might be a great idea. But then like America being like, what the hell did you guys just approve? So that's something to keep in mind. But they prefer more assassinations and targeted killings rather than the type of just Islamic mass civilian casualty terrorism that was there. But maybe they're moving into a different direction. So we'll have to see. But now we're going to go into the COD of League questions, the rest of them. I'll give my pitch once again. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the COD of Elite option at Highly Respected Substack. And that's at highly-respected.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there. I'm going to have to keep them brief because once again, we got a ton of questions today. So I'm going to try not to go overboard with them. I'll finish off with K-Max. Even though I know Richard Hanani as being partly tongue-in-cheek with this, what does he mean by Sydney Sweeney's boobs breaking wokeness in a Substack article? Sweeney hosted SNL recently, and all of her skits took advantage of her sexual attractiveness. To take it seriously, it is about human nature. Now, attractive women driving up ratings will always be true, despite the new culture of lefts pushes obese women or trans women onto magazines and see Saturday Night Live is as woke as they come, but even they seem to wear Sydney Sweeney's appeal. I don't really believe it's anti-woke. I think he's trying to say it is like it's a restoration of true natural human beauty standards. Is that, the woke doesn't want us to admire boobs and natural feminine beauty. It wants us to see fat women as beautiful. There is something in there, but I'm not fully with this. I think he is just trying to engagement bait with the anti-woke because it became viral and a lot of media outlets were talking about it. It became even a meme of itself, what he was saying about it. So I just think he's just leaning into that. He has somewhat of a serious point, but I don't think boobs are anti-woke. I think that even the woke have to admit that this is what it's about. And even the woke are fully on board with like sex work and OnlyFans. He does say this stuff that like they hate sex, but they love sex work. It's true, but I don't really think that City Sweetie's boobs are leading a counter-revolution. There was all these conservatives who were trying to say this. It's like, wow, City Sweetie in a Hooter shirt. We're winning. It's like, we still have cheerleaders on the sidelines for NFL games. They have not eliminated all aspects of feminine beauty in America. It is what it is. I don't think that there's anything to get upset about. There's other people getting upset about our boobs. I just, not a topic I wanted to engage in, or not a topic that's a online rage bait or flame war that I really felt was very important. So that's my answer to him. Now I'm going to go to poor Kingslander. Kingslander has been getting ignored by me, unfortunately, because he had questions that he had sent initially and they went to spam and I didn't get them. And then he had questions last week that somehow I overlooked, but we had a record number of questions. So I need to go to Kingslander. My apologies, Mr. Lander. So he said, Why do the Republicans seem to have such a tough time winning Wisconsin? On paper, it seems like any other Midwest state with a sizable rural and predominantly white population, as well as a Republican majority in both the state house and Senate. However, unlike Ohio, the Republicans haven't been able to flip it to a stable red state. What is it about the dynamics of Wisconsin that have made it hard for them to convert it to a red state on a national level? They're having more success than Michigan and Pennsylvania. They do have a Republican supermajority within the House or within their state legislature there. That's just developed over. That occurred in 2022 or 2023. I forget if it was like a special election that made that, but they do have a Republican supermajority in the state legislature. They do have a Democrat governor. Ron Johnson won a statewide race there, and he's very conservative, and they're all saying he's election denier and all this stuff, and he still won in 2022. And Trump was only a few votes away from winning the state in 2020. And you could maybe say that they found the extra votes to ensure that he did not win the election. But it's actually it's trending in a much more red direction. It was very much seen as this far left bastion, even compared to, the rest of the Midwest before. As a big college town with Madison, Wisconsin, it's always seen as been a major left-wing hub. It's got Milwaukee that's always been very left-wing, has a large black population as well. And some of its rural population has still been very progressive for years. But as the case with rural populations throughout America, they've been switching to Republican. And it's probably more like with Republican nationwide, it's probably a matter of the suburbs. They're starting to have problems within the suburbs around Milwaukee and elsewhere that have gone, they're trending a little bit more blue. But in general, it is a state that is becoming more Republican. And I think in 2024, it is a state that's going to go for Trump. It's going to go red. I think it will not even be by a small margin that it was like in 2016. I think it'll be by a pretty sizable margin. So it is trending in that direction. It just still has a really built-in progressive base there that some other states don't have, like Ohio. Ohio never had these, it has Sherrod Brown, but Sherrod Brown had a more populist, blue-collar image. They've had a real kind of very progressive Democratic Party in Wisconsin, but it's been breaking over time. I mean, even with Scott Walker becoming governor, that showed signs that it was moving in a direction. It's just not been as rapid of a development as it is with Ohio. But I think it is over time because a lot of people are moving from these suburbanites are moving from these states. There is an exodus of some of their liberals, and it's leaving just behind the rural conservatives. And these rural areas are going, due to Trump and other factors, they've been going much more Republican in recent elections. Very few of these rural areas vote Democrat anymore. And that's part of the trend line that's happening within Wisconsin as well. So I don't think the real question is more Pennsylvania and Michigan rather than Wisconsin, in my opinion, or Minnesota, that's even another issue. Wisconsin still has some of those goofy Midwest progressives that dominate, white progressives that dominate Minnesota, but to a much lesser extent. So his second question, how much of the modern rejection of wokeness is due to the Democrats no longer being able to launder their legislation through the Supreme Court? Back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, I remember gay marriage being an incredibly contentious debate, which even Obama wasn't willing to support until much later in his presidency, and was fiercely waged until the Supreme Court sided in favor of gay marriage, at which point basically any organized opposition to it disappeared. It seems like when the Democrats actually have to run on legislating their culture shifts, such as transgenderism, affirmative action, and replacement migration, is an instant non-starter when it put to the ballot box. No, I think there's a lot of truth there. There is definitely a lot of truth there that they're no longer able to get this through the Supreme Court. The one thing exception with gay marriage is that I think if it had been put up to a nationwide vote, the gay marriage would have won overwhelmingly at that point in 2015. If you had put it on the ballot in 2011, it would have lost. But there was just a rapid change in the early 2010s because in 2008, they had a referendum on banning gay marriage in California, and it won. But, that referendum wouldn't have won in 2010 or 2012. And I think even nationwide, if you had put it to a vote in 2015, nation would have voted for gay marriage. It was just where the nation was. Sometimes a lot of times the Supreme Court is the head of the nation on these matters. This is especially true during the Warren Court in the 50s and 60s. But with gay marriage, it was with the nation. The thing is, they realized that legislatively it would have never passed due to Republican control and other matters. It would have never seen the light of day. But now, when they actually have to legislate on issues where the majority is not with them, on transgenderism, affirmative action, and replace migration, it's not happening, and they're having a lot of limits to this. So that is a factor, I think, in it. It doesn't really explain the cultural push against wokeness or wanting to or fatigue with wokeness, but it does explain how some of these things are getting limited when it comes to the political process. So that is true. So we'll move on to a dollar bill. I'm actually going to go to New England Refugee because he sent a question just after the deadline last week. So I'm going to, even though I usually finish off New England Refugee, I'm going to go with him. Now, he said, wasn't Magic Miami this weekend? This would have been last weekend. Could have not been happier about how hardcore the cops are. They're arresting Magic left and right. My friends and I are still able to drink in bars and on the beach and do all the things normal Americans do while cops are all around us. Really crushes the anti-cop position in my mind. As long as you're not being a criminal, police won't arrest you. Who knew? What makes a right-wing cop hater? A lot of these guys come from libertarian perspective. And I think a lot of guys who are right-wing now are very anti-establishment. They're anti-establishment and for understandable reasons. And they aren't, and a lot of these guys come from a libertarian background where anti-police was a fundamental core of it. It's like libertarians aren't really motivated by issues that actually matter to Americans. They're motivated by issues that happened to them as a teenager. It's like, I hated when the teacher or the cop stole my weed, and that pig's going to get it. So then they become anti-cop and then pro-weed simply because they got caught smoking weed when they're 16. And this is the defining event in their life. And so that's what makes a lot of these right-wing cop haters. And a lot of them are just, anti-mainstream, anti-establishment for understandable reasons. And they view cops as the foot soldiers of this. The thing is like, if you didn't have cops, our situation would be a lot worse. And a lot of cops agree with what we believe in. Now, yes, when cops would arrest people for violating COVID lockdowns, that is not a reason to say Blue Lives Matter or we stand with the blue. But most of what they do is positive, or what we want them to do. And the main problems with cops is not that they are too harsh. Because this is always the thing with libertarians, is that our right-wing anti-cop is that they get mad at like one, and they'll sometimes even defend like these black guys who shoot at cops during a no-knock raid. And it's like, why are you defending this? It's like, and first off, like white conservatives are never going to use a gun in a no-knock raid. And like, this is my resistance towards tyranny. It's like, dude, you're going to throw the gun away and put your hands up because you're a white person. You follow authority and order. Unless you're a criminal or have a criminal. There's a few that may actually point the gun at them. I don't recommend that. But blacks will do that because it's like they're coming from the criminal background and they'll just shoot, which is always really stupid to shoot at cops. If they are shooting at you and you have zero chance of survival, I guess you take your chances. But in a general situation, if they're like freeze, you put your hands up and you follow orders in that scenario. But a lot of these guys just want to, think that like cops suck, but they'll also want like cops to just like shoot criminals and be like Judge Dredd at the same time that they cry over cops like, pulling someone over an arrest. And then the libertarians are like, I have my right to not roll down the window. And it's like, stop being a dickhead. Just roll down your window and like you were going 5 miles over, whatever. Just deal with it. It's like one of the hassles of life. Like cops are supposed to be assholes because if they weren't, no one would respect them. you have to have that intimidation factor, is that's how you get citizens to oblige. And no matter what ideal society you would have police like that. It's just that a lot of people have, a lot of our side, they're very anti-authority in general, a little bit even too much beyond a reasonable means, and they view cops as authority figures, and this comes from the libertarian background, and they just, as I was saying with like a lot of these libertarians last week who were like, we need to arm illegals to go after the pigs in ICE, which is just like an insane perspective. These guys are just like having a fuck you dad attitude towards politics, and they can't get over it. And there's no greater evil dad figure than police. But if you want people to clear out magic, it's not going to happen with libertarians who think that, and these libertarians all came out in support of BLM and other things at that time, and the Boogaloo Boys came out with BLM. The guys who are going to crack down on BLM and magic are going to be police, not libertarians. I would not trust nerdy ANCAPs to turn into Batman to deal with crime, which is a lot of what they think. So in an ideal society, police would be how they are today. They would just not be arresting people for things that we think that nobody should be arrested for, like hate speech or not wearing a mask or whatever reasons that people imagine. So I'm always very anti-police when it comes to that. So that is that question. We'll go to Dollar Bill now. Dollar Bill. Are physically ugly people more likely to have left-wing politics? Obviously, there are exceptions like Gavin Newsom and Justin Trudeau, but I feel there is a strong correlation. Mr. Grove had a great tweet where he posted a mugshot of Lenin when he was arrested at one point and commented there's a reason why the most famous images of Lenin show him in profile, because viewed straight on, he looked like a homeless guy arrested for pleasuring himself in a public library. Being an uggo is, of course, a handicap in life, and a lot of messages of leftism is it's others people's fault. Why are you unhappy? Yeah, I think they are. Well, I think a lot of physically ugly people are kind of stupid, and they're not capable of having like politics in general. Like probably the ugliest people in our society that are like 500 pounds and just look like mutants are just too stupid. They're like have very low IQs and they can't even engage in politics. But a lot of leftists are ugly or are losers because it is an ideology built on resentment. And I always worry about right-wingers getting too much into that of embracing a loser mentality and a resentful attitude of being like, oh, we're oppressed, we're losers, we're persecuted, we're victims, because eventually you attract the uggos and you attract the ugly people, you attract the downtrodden. And yeah, a lot of leftists were very ugly in general, but a lot of right-wingers aren't the Giga Chads they imagine. I don't think that they're ugly, but it is funny when you have like an ugly person being like, this guy's ugly. They're not Chad. And it's like, have you looked at yourself in a mirror? And you'll sometimes see that with some people. But yeah, I think it is true because people turn to left-wing politics due to feeling like an outsider and downcast and downtrodden, and as a way of getting back at the good-looking people that they experienced in high school or in college and in daily life. And they want a way of feeling morally superior. And what better way of feeling morally superior than thinking that it's white supremacy that you can't get a date, or the patriarchy or whatever. And so, yeah, it definitely attracts less attractive people. So, good question. We've still got a lot more questions. So if you're wondering if I'm going to get to your question, no need to fear. I am going to get to your question. Actually, no, I'm going to wait on that because that's a combo question. Okay, we'll go with, I think this is John Chandler. Yeah, it is John Chandler. With 2024 heating up, who are some of the better America First candidates that are running right now in the Senate, House, and gubernatorial races this year? One thing I feel is that it's not talked about enough on our side is that we need more people in House, Senate, and governors that share our views or at least closer to Trumpism. I say this especially with regards to ones that are more respectable and not, as you say, part of the insane clown party. Curious to hear you discuss who might some of these be. I don't really want to say anyone specific right now in mind. I think the one trend you have to notice is that the party itself is much more Trumpist than even it was in 2022 or 2020, is that everyone is adopting these America First positions and wanting to compete for who's more Trumpist than ever before. You can see this with Bernie Moreno in Ohio, who just won the primary there. In 2022, when he ran as a squishy establishment type. He was not even very strong on immigration when he ran. He wasn't strong on a lot of our issues. And, J.D. Vance won as the America First guy. Now when he ran as the strongest guy on these issues. He was saying a lot of good stuff about immigration. And he was being extremely pro-Trump. And this wasn't his views a few years ago, but now they're his views. And that's the same with a lot of these strong candidates who are running, is that it's a lot of, they're politicians. They go wherever the wind's blowing. And the wind's blowing in a Trumpist direction. So they're all adopting Trumpism and America First positions. And this is across the board the same. And no candidate who goes against Trump or is anti-Trump has a chance of winning a primary. And it's becoming Trump's party. And this is seen within the primaries. It's seen with the candidates who are running. It's seen at the RNC level. And the RNC is now an appendage of Trump world in general. And this is all positive development. And so I don't want to say anyone specific because most of these guys are now running on a Trumpist position that they wouldn't have been running on a few years ago, as seen with Bernie Moreno and a few others. You've even seen this with Kerry Lake. I guess you could say Mark Robinson. He might be a little bit too insane clown party, but it's whatever. We'll still support him. There are some negatives. I mean, like Trump did endorse Boebert, which I really did not support, but it's whatever. It's not gonna change my support of Trump, and it's just like whatever. But you do get at some of these people that are like that are clownish. But it's probably better for like a Moreno, who is a respectable guy. He's like a well-off car dealer. When he embraces these views, he has a greater chance of advancing it than the clowns like Boebert and MTG. And it does suck when you have your views best expressed by Boebert or MTG, because it makes it more embarrassing for you to have these views and makes it for smarter people to not want to embrace those ideas. So it's good that you now have people who maybe not truly believe this stuff, but they are adopting it because they know it's politically potent and it's how they win elections. So I would say that that's a good exception. That's a good development of that. I think we've got a question from Paul. Let me find that question. Yeah, here it is. He says, I'm curious if you have any ideas as to why some of the smaller New England states of Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire are consistently Democrat despite their incredibly white demographics and the fact that they don't seem to have any major urban areas making such a large percentage of those states' population like Illinois or New York, or like the rest of the New England region. Is it like others have said, due to the region being very socially left-wing, college-educated, something else? If so, why are those states so socially livable? Also, because of their very white demographics, can the right in the long term make inroads in those states? And if it's possible, how? I think there's just an expression of what happens when whites live in nice white states and they're not around diversity and they become more libtarded. New Hampshire is an exception. New Hampshire has had a very strong right. I think it is due to more of what's happening in the rest of the country around college-educated whites in the suburbs that's turning New Hampshire liberal. Vermont and Maine are a little bit different. Vermont and Maine have the most libtarded whites in the country that living in rural areas are living in nice white towns that are idyllic and, attract tourists and visitors. And they're just straight liberal as the whites there. And that's why all these Mainers want like as many asylum seekers and refugees as possible, like in Portland and a few other of these areas. They're just very liberal. And you can even see this in Oregon and Washington. The rural areas of Oregon and Washington are still very conservative, but in the areas on the coast, it's very liberal because of the type of whites that are there. And a lot of whites, if they're not experiencing any diversity, they sometimes turn into massive shit libs. It is one thing is that the presence of blacks in a state make whites much more right-wing. Because you compare Mississippi whites, which are a very thin majority in Mississippi, but they overwhelmingly vote Republican, overwhelmingly vote Trump, overwhelmingly like racially have a degree of racial consciousness, versus Vermont whites who will vote for the Great Replacement if that was ever put to a poll. And so it's a degree of whites. And you could say that the presence of blacks, you have to really say specifically blacks rather than so much diversity, because you can have, and it's American blacks too, because Minnesota's having a ton of Somalis, and look at their voting patterns. They're still like shit libs. So you really, once you have the presence of American blacks and and the white population is aware of them and how they operate, it makes their politics much more right wing. Compare the South, which all these states have a thin white majority, and even in Texas, where it's a thin white, they're not even majority there. Hispanics are the majority, or not the majority; they're the plurality. Once you have the presence of blacks and maybe even Hispanics, but really blacks, you become much more right wing. And these states, when they live in whitopia and they think that everyone can come there, and that culture, the New England culture itself is always been very liberal and progressive. These are the effects that happen. New Hampshire is a little bit different. New Hampshire has a little bit more urban areas than that. I think that the changes that are going on there, it's more along the lines of what's happening with college-educated whites in general throughout the country. But Maine and New Hampshire are unique breeds, and it's something that you would compare to Minneapolis, to Portland and Seattle, where when whites don't have to deal with the ravages of diversity, they become very libtarded. Not always the case. I mean, you could see Montana, Idaho, obviously exception, but whites are not. It depends on the area that they're living and the type of culture around them. And will they ever make inroads there? No. Actually, those areas become more liberal and blue over time. New Hampshire is now like a solid blue state. It's one of the few states that went from a battleground territory to blue state. You had also Virginia. Virginia is more of a battleground state than I think in New Hampshire, but they're about equal in that regards. Or like Republicans can win statewide. It's like Virginia. Republicans can win statewide election there, but it's not very likely, and it's unlikely that they'll win presidential elections. It's just gone more blue over time. And no, I think they're just going to stay blue. We're more dependent on winning over states like Arizona, or returning Arizona to Republican fold, or winning over Nevada, making Wisconsin, which Wisconsin has. You know what Wisconsin has? It has blacks. It has diversity, and that's actually pushing them in a more right-wing direction. Same with Ohio, and also these rural whites are the rural whites in those areas are very different from the whites in Vermont and Maine. I mean, Maine. It seems like the more right-wing base of the French Canadians rather than the Anglos there. Paul LePage came from the French Canadian demographic. So that's something there. Maybe over time they wake up if they get too much diversity. But it's only going to become like when they get too much diversity, which is sad and you shouldn't support, that they would have any chance of going right. But in the near future, I don't see any of these places going right wing. It's just a lot of our problems is that a lot of these whites we have, the biggest problem we have is just like how many whites just fundamentally believe this shit. And they will accept their dispossession and replacement. And they think it's a moral purpose behind it. And you can find no better evidence than these New Englanders. Last point, the worst ruralites on Twitter all come from New England. And they've always imagined that their hometown is like a based area, that if there's a gay person, they're immediately disappeared. And then when these guys like post, their areas, it actually turned out that they had a drag queen story hour in the local town that they live, that they claim that like gay people are not allowed. And it's like the biggest LARP ever. It's like you live in a progressive, you live in a progressive dystopia. I don't know if it's a dystopia. It's a nice place to live, but you live in an area where they are forcing kids to go to drag queen story hour. And then you're trying to claim that like, oh, it's way more conservative than the city folks deal with. And then it turns out it's not the case. But I don't want to digress too much because we have a big episode today. So I think this might be the last question Or it's a no, no, no. We have a combination question that's going to happen. I actually have one more. This is from Fake Cell Eradicator. He's got two questions. He says, with the newfound volume of Cotton Elite questions recently, is it finally time to reset the Greer head dopamine cycle? Monday, highly respected. Wednesday, questions show. Friday, IQ supplements. Actually, I think we may have to turn this into it. We're getting so many questions. We're not there yet, but we're almost there. I think I may start doing a mailbag episode because these are running into 2 hours and I would have more time to address some of these questions if that's all I'm talking about. Because, it's like a Monday episode. You run out of steam. So it's better. I would give better answers if we just had a mailbag episode. I will consider that. I don't know if I would do that as a paywall thing or what. I'll see what our Cotton Elite members want. If they would prefer to have a paywall episode where I give a full-length answer to their questions, maybe that would be the better way to do this. Or if they want it on the regular show that's not behind a paywall, we'll ask. I'll send out an email this week to assess what people want and where they would prefer their questions. Second question, have you heard any street level chatter or seen any soft posturing as to what the notional red lines will be for who is kept out of Trump 47 admin? Are Scott Greer and Darren Beatty still be on the panel? Any tangential Fuentes association will probably still be a no-go, I think. Are Bannon and Mike Flynn pretty much the outer edge of who gets in? Also, who do you think will be primarily responsible for gatekeeping, and who are the behind-the-scenes people with veto power about who isn't allowed? Oh, there'll be a lot less gatekeeping. I could probably go into the administration. I don't really want to because I prefer doing what I am now and I have more influence around now. And what I would get is like a junior position, like writing the Secretary of Interior speeches probably. I'd much rather do what I'm doing now. Darren Beatty could be allowed in. The thing is they could be allowed in, but we want more senior positions, which we probably wouldn't get. Any Fuentes association... depends on how public it is. They probably will let they're going to let grapers in. I don't know if Bannon, Mike Flynn Bannon might get into the administration, but they have more influence on the outside. No, there's not going to be a lot of gatekeeping. I think it's more about who's going to be in senior roles. In junior roles, the type of gatekeeping they were doing in the first administration is not going to happen again. I knew guys who were getting in the administration and they may have had an Antifa blog about them or any type of public criticism of them, and it held up their ability to get in. That stuff's not going to happen again. There will be some type of red line. If you're a TRS host, I don't think you're going to get in. I don't think they're going to be offering Fuentes a job or his close associates a job. But having an Antifa hit piece on you or, even a mainstream media attacking you for some tweets you had, I don't think that would be a way of getting out of being allowed in. I would say I would be the defining line of what it is. They would welcome Darren back in the administration. It's a little bit... I said they would give me a junior role. I do think if I accepted some really junior role, they may be able to, but they'd have to utilize a lot of political capital to get in, and then I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now with all the highly respected. I don't know if I would want to go along with it. This is all really... it's really a bridge. We're not even getting close to that bridge. We have to wait till Trump gets there. But from what I know now is that for when it comes to junior level, they're not going to be caring about what you've been tweeting that much. They're not going to be caring about if Antifa's attacked you or what leftists are going to attack you. They're going to welcome you in the administration. And if CNN and others are attacking you, what K-File, Andrew Kaczynski at CNN was doing, where he would find out who these staffers were and then write a hit piece on them. It's they tweeted out something in 2015 that's Islamophobic, and then the admin would kick them out. That's not going to happen again. If people are getting attacked, they're going to be more likely to defend them. What happened with Darren is not going to happen in a second term. They're not going to give a shit that you spoke at HL Making Club or you spoke at an event where Peter Bremont was at. And a lot of these guys, it's, the New York Young Republicans Club. A lot of those guys are going to be going into the administration. and they welcome people like Peter Bremlow and a lot of other people, and that's not going to bother who's hiring. It may prevent them from getting maybe senior roles depending on who is actual in control. But when it comes to junior roles, they're not going to be able to keep out these people. And even when it comes to senior roles, I think there's going to be a lot less gatekeeping. So I guess that's a white pill. I do want to say I was a little bit presumptuous by saying that I would be welcome into the administration. I don't think. I think I still would be a little bit beyond the pale, but that's okay. I like having the independence of this. Of what I'm doing right now. It's very freeing. I get to say what I want and not have to worry about who I'm offending or whatever. So it's good. Now for the final question, and it's going to be a combination because both the final questioners asked a similar question. I'm going to combine this. But I'm going to first start off with Trux. Trux is asking, he has multiple questions, but the second question aligns with another one. He said, what are your thoughts on the open source software question, e.g. Linux? What about alternatives to big tech services like those offered by Google, Microsoft, Apple, etc.? People, especially on our side, should be aware of the links to which big tech will spy on you via your computers, etc., etc. I'm for them. I don't know a lot about them. That's my question about that. Yeah, they can scan. Some people go a little bit overboard. Like I know somebody who will like not send me emails through Gmail because they're like, Google is spying on you through this. And I'm like, look, whatever you're sending, I don't care about Google seeing. Okay. It's not like you do have to worry about these, people spying on you and stuff, but using Tor and other things, I don't know if Tor is the right way to say this, but using these type of open, these alternatives are all good. I just don't know a lot about it, so I'm not the one to give my thoughts on it. Now, the second question I give a lot of thoughts on, and this is something that was asked by a new guy who goes by Chud. Love the name, Chud. And so Trux asks, what are your thoughts on the social media and online dating questions? I would lose no sleep if I saw that either were banned nationwide, given their roles in eroding the third place as an appropriate place to meet people, be they new friends or potential romantic partners, and socialize. So I will keep that question in mind, and then we're going to add Chud's question, which he asks, do you think we are headed to a newer South Korea type future where gender politics become even more entrenched and extreme and the birth rate drops even more dramatically as a result? What is your advice for a right-wing man or woman in terms of finding a partner? He has his own thoughts. I'll read them. Women are extremely susceptible to trendy BLM type nonsense, so dating a normie girl from school or dating app is risky. One wrong move by you or a trend starts to ramp up in her world and your life could become a living hell. I saw this very thing happen with my parents. On the other hand, many right-wing women have other underlying issues and there just aren't all that many of them. Sam Hyde has a classic video where he implores his viewers not to date the girl who portrays herself as the trad waifu because she likely has a screw loose. There's very little incentive and in fact much the opposite for normal women to hold or even tolerate right-wing views. You either need to remain nominally apolitical and hope your girlfriend wife doesn't get too annoying or be more open and significantly restrict your dating options. So how do you get women to tolerate rightists? A good angle could be that to say that the right has better answer for crime, which seems appealing to women. Hanade's suggestion seems to be to drop abortion, which is a non-starter for Republicans. The BAP solution is to have sex with prostitutes and other, I don't know if he's saying have sex with other men, but a lot of that type of sphere says you have sex with prostitutes. I guess a workaround could be to become so successful and jacked that women don't mind your views, but that is obviously not practical on societal level. Actually, yes, becoming so successful, jacked, and handsome is how you get women to accept this. And charming, it's personality that makes a lot of the difference to that. And so a lot of these women will say this. So overall, the dating question. Dating apps, are we heading to a South Korea future? So I'll answer Trux. He insists on being called Trux rather than Trucks. It's Trux, but he wants to be called Trux, like the U is pronounced in the German, like Bund. He wants to be pronounced Trux. So Trux, he says on social media and online dating, you have to do online dating if you're single. That's like the fact of the matter, because these third places that Trooks alluded to are no longer there. Due to Me Too, it's very risky to meet people at work and to date through work. They have a lot more rules. People still do it. You can still get away with it, but it is a huge risk. You can go up and say you have a crush on the secretary or whatever. You think she's cute, and you go up and ask her out. That could end your career. Because she can just say, I was sexually harassed by this guy. And you talk to people. This is way more common post Me Too. This is still something common pre Me Too, but it became much more common post Me Too. I even remember this even at the Caller, is that we didn't have that many women at the Caller when we were there. And all these women would complain. It's like, all these guys are asking me out because it's obvious male to female imbalance. But they didn't really give a shit. It was just a joke. Post Me Too, they did fire a few people. I know they fired, I think, 2 people. This is after I was even gone, for that type of stuff, which they would have not done pre-Me Too. And that's like, even that's something like a conservative place that's happening. And I know, and if I talk to normies who are out there, this is a much bigger problem for this. And you don't really have the large social circles that our parents and grandparents did, because most people met their wife at a party where it was, this person wasn't just a stranger. This person was a friend of a friend. And you just like, oh, this person has similar friends. Maybe they have similar interests. I go up and talk to them, and they have a commonality. The chemistry builds. That's where they build. People don't have social circles like that anymore. They have much smaller, limited social circles where they're not able to meet just some person they don't really know, but that person's connected in some way, whether it's a college party or something. They don't, and especially outside of college, they don't have that. So they have to turn to dating apps. But dating apps have problems with them. And I saw a tweet last week saying that dating apps have declined, have hurt men the most because it's given women the sense of infinite options. And that it's a marked decline in people wanting to have serious relationships and marriages. Now, a lot of serious relationships and marriages have happened from dating apps, but at the same time, it gives you the perception that you have a ton of options out there, which you're less willing to settle for this stuff. And that's the person was saying. This is true. It's true for both the most high market value men and true for any type of decent looking woman. So even the middle tier. Maybe it probably even might be true for the bottom tier women, because guys will just swipe right on everything. And there'll be like women who are, fat or whatever, disgusting, that, manipulate their photo, and they got like some guy a good looking guy to swipe right on it. And now they think that that's what they can obtain. And so a lot of these women will spend their entire 20s, going, feeling that they have a ton of options. And if they're an attractive woman, they do have a lot of options. The difference in the dating market for most men, it's for all these women complaining about finding good man scarcity and whatever, is that all these women feel that they cannot get what they most desire because they one time got matched with a Giga Chad and maybe he ghosted her or whatever, but they all feel that they can obtain that one man. And so they'll have like dozens of options, but they don't feel it meets their dream ideal. And society tells them that they should never settle and they should always attain their ideal. For men, I think it's finding a decent woman in general rather than finding, Sydney Sweeney. That's like a bigger issue for them and for men. And so there's this lopsided difference where you have tons of men, even when they always complain, it's like, oh, these cities, it's overwhelmingly female. And there's a bigger dating pool for men than there is for women. But no attractive woman has ever felt like true dating market scarcity. If you're a decently attractive woman, you're not fat, you have tons of options. For men, the only men who are doing this are like at the absolute top market value. Like, they look like Giga Chad. They look like one of these memes. And it's only like that percentage. Well, with women, they could be a 5 or a 6 and have dozens of options. But they all don't feel that it meets what they want for their ideal. And so the dating apps have, I think, inflated women's expectations, and also for the highest market value men, it's given them even more options than they would have ever had before. And then they don't want to settle down. And it gives hope to all these women that they could get that type of guy to settle down with them. But of course, he will never settle down with them. And so all these women in their pursuit of Moby Dick, in one way of saying it, that their pursuit of Giga Chad, they'll go through dozens of options, refuse to settle, and then they'll end up 35 and still believing they can land, Mr. Giga Chad. Well, Giga Chad will be at 35 and still getting these young, 25-year-old girls to go on dates with them and sleep with them. And so it creates that. I think dating apps have a responsibility in that type of dynamic. And you could argue that it would be better to ban them, but the thing is, if you ban them, you're just going to even see a worse thing happen, is that people would not meet anyone at all. For a lot of these places, because especially in urban areas, like most people don't have those large social circles where they can meet people. And if we did have those third places where people could gather and meet younger people or people their age who are singles, or they allowed more of the stuff at the workplace, then it probably would be better without the dating apps, because people would be more willing to stay committed and settle for that person, and then not think that they have a million other options out there and they could have someone better than what they have in front of them. And thus you would probably increase marriage and family formation. But that's not the world we live in. And due to how much time we spend online with Twitter and other social media and Instagram and all this stuff, it makes sense to have online dating. And it's just the nature of the beast that we're going to have online dating. Maybe things can change. You should, and a lot of these women do. I don't think, one thing I have to say is that most women actually do want to settle down with a relationship. And maybe they don't want to have kids, but they can be convinced of this. I mean, women are easily persuadable of a lot of things. A lot of them are herd animals, but they do have this ideal, this unrealistic ideal that they constantly pursue, and dating apps give them the false hope that they can actually achieve that. And it makes them less willing to tolerate behavior of a man or to tolerate certain traits of a man that they're seeing, if they feel like, okay, he eats pickles or eats funny, I'm going to dump him and see what else is on Tinder or Bumble. A lot of women are like that. And so that's just the nature of the beast. But do I support banning it? No, because you wouldn't have the instant development of third places. First off, you're just not going to ban it in general. But you wouldn't have the sudden, embrace of the third options. I mean, these, like porn, dating apps are symptoms of larger problems. And instead of treating the causes, you're treating the symptoms, which then doesn't lead to the positive results we have. Like, all these people are like, if we ban porn, which porn's bad in general, not defending porn, but people think like if you ban porn, you'll suddenly have like tons of marriages and tons of kids. No, people turn to porn because they're lonely, they have no one in their lives, and it's just the nature of having the online world we're living in. It's a symptom of a deeper cause. Now to Chud's questions, are we heading to a South Korea future? Yes. I mean, yeah, absolutely. It is not, you're not having a reversal among Zoomers. Zoomers, all these trends that have been very negative among millennials are getting worse among Zoomers. I mean, if you look at the polling and studies of like dating habits, a lot of these guys have never had dated before in their lives, even when they're hit college. Some people see this as positive. Fewer of them are having sex, but it's less of that they're becoming false selves and returning to traditional values, and then more of a factor that they're not finding anyone to date, and they're not finding anyone to socialize with, and they have far fewer friends, and that means that they have fewer social connections to actually meet people outside of online dating, and then they're fed into the online dating market, which, as I said, has this tumultuous cycle involved with it. So that happens. But so we are heading to the South Korea. I don't know if it'll get as bad as like 0.1, as like below 1. I don't know. They're heading to like 0 in South Korea. I don't think it will get that bad, but it will be like that. And you will have those gender politics happening, maybe not as extreme in South Korea as would be in here, just because of the cultural differences and other things. And it's also the fact that all these young women, these libtarded women, they want like Gavin Newsom. They want a handsome guy as their leader rather than like an ugly woman. And that's why Democrat politics still has like Gavin Newsom types still in leadership roles. Because they still want a strong male, but he's a progressive male in charge. So they still have that. So you're not gonna. I don't think it would be type reflected in gender politics, but you're already having that disparity. And as more of these people stay single and are not marrying, you're going to see that dominate our politics a lot more. So it'll definitely be similar with that. With the advice about finding a right wing spouse. With that, I think it's like normies. You're maybe a little bit too down on normies. I think if you're not like 100% involved in this stuff, like you just like, you're listening to these podcasts and other things, I don't think you have to worry that much about it, dating a normie. I think if it's somebody with my position where it's like, this is my life, whether I like it or not, this is my life, and you're dating a normie and she's like not down with this at all, and there comes a lot of risk and pressure from this, and a lot of normie girls are not going to stay with it. A lot of people who get doxxed, it causes domestic disturbances. A lot of divorces have happened over doxes, and a lot of people don't want to talk about this because on Twitter, everyone imagines that they have this based, submissive, fashy wife who is 100% down with the cause. And then I've known people who the wife allegedly agreed with their viewpoints, and then she didn't when the dox happened. So, and yeah, there is a lot of underlying issues with right-wing women too. I won't maybe not go into that, but there's definitely a lot of loose screws with these women, and you have to worry about that with them. And a lot of them can go immediately to the left from the right. Katie McHugh is an example of that. A lot of other examples of that. And but if you're not fully involved in this stuff, I think just find a normie girl. It's fine. Especially and if you're in your 20s, you've got a lot of time, you got a lot of options. And if you're working on yourself, like, you got to make yourself sure you're very successful, you're exuding a positive attitude, you're a funny guy, people like to talk to you, you're physically fit, you should go to the gym. Yeah, and you'll find like somebody. It's very tough out there. It's very blackpilling for both men and women. I think for men, it's blackpilling because they're realistic. I think for women, it's blackpilling because they're unrealistic, but for different reasons. But everyone is, all young people who are single bemoan the state of it. But, you shouldn't blackpill about this. You just got to work on yourself. You've got to keep your options open. And when you find someone good and a right person that you feel that you could share a life with, you wife them up and you move on. And it's a very different scenario when you're someone like me that's, fully invested in the stuff. You've been doxxed. This is your life. This is your career. You have a lot of risks that come along with this stuff. But for the person who's not fully out there, there's a lot of options out there. There's a lot of hope. You just got to work on yourself to make yourself as best as you can be and have a positive attitude, and you will find the right person. So that's my bit of a white pill we have. Now, Trooks still has some more questions, so I've got to get to them. It's just 3. I'll keep these short because unfortunately we're almost out of time. Inspired by a question from last week, would you consider high art to be inherently right quoted? I personally would, even in spite of the overwhelmingly anti-traditionalist messaging for most art produced after the middle of the 20th century. Yes, actually I would say if you're a young person and not gay and you're listening to opera, that is right coded. I think all this stuff is right coded. And if you're like a young white person into this stuff, it's really is saying, if you're reading Shakespeare, if you're reading Plutarch, I guess Plutarch would be high art. It's not really art, it's more biography. But if you're reading, Homer, you're reading the classic literature, you're listening to classical music. And for classical music, a lot of the people, unfortunately, are homosexual. It's fine. You should still listen to it anyway. It is right coded. Whether the intent of the artist was left coded or not, in our current world, our current sphere, it is a rejection of the modern world, so it is inherently right-coded. I could talk a little bit more about this in other episodes, but we will stick to this now. This is why we should do a mailbag episode with all these commonly questions. We may start doing this next week. But another round of composers to call keyed, unkeyed, or unredeemably cringe. Schumann, obviously keyed. Love Schumann. Love his Furtwängler's rendition of his Fourth Symphony is incredible. I'm a big fan of his symphonies. Schumann is keyed. Debussy, I'm not that big into Debussy. I like his opera, Pettia. I'm not going to even... His one opera, which I'm not going to pronounce in French because I'm not going to try to look stupid. Not that... He's okay. Ravel, okay, not that into. Bartok, I'm really into Bartok. I'm pronouncing his misname, but I don't know. When they say it's like Bartok, when they say it on classical radio, I think they say Bartok. I really like Bluebeard's Castle. That's one of my favorite operas. I like a lot of his other work, even though it's very modernist. So I'm a big fan of it. Philip Glass, a little bit torn on that. Oh, so Bartok keyed. Debussy and Maurice Ravel, I just say, whatever. Philip Glass would not say unkeyed or unredeemably cringe. I would actually say unkeyed, even if his works are okay. I think the mindset about it, the minimalist. Some of the minimalist works are very good, but it's not as good as the real classics of the Romantic sphere and in the classical era. But I wouldn't say it's bad. I would say it's okay. I would rather listen to Philip Glass than Mahler. So that is it for Highly Respected today. I have a sinking feeling that somebody's going to be like, you didn't answer my questions, but we are almost at the 2-hour mark. That's why we should switch to a mailbag episode so we get all the questions and they're fully answered. We may do that next week. But that is it for Highly Respected. This week, we're going to have more great content, article, and IQ supplement later this week. So be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.